welcome. We're ready to begin our weekly Torah portion study. This week's Torah portion is Balak, which, if you're in the Blue Art Scroll Chumash, is on page 856. Now, this week's Torah portion is a very unique story, but like every Torah portion, has very, very vital, relevant, and important lessons for all of our lives. So what's the backstory of Balak? Balak is the king of a nation called Moab. And he feels threatened by the Jewish people. Why? Because he just saw what happened to the Amorites. What happened to the Amorites? In last week's Torah portion, the Jews were traveling on the way to the land of Israel. They needed to pass through the land of the Amorites. And Moshe Rabbeinu sent a message to the Amorites. The king, his name was Sichon, and he said, listen, I just want to pass through your land. I'm not going to drink your water from the wells. I'm not going to go into your vineyards, into your fields. We're just going to take a straight route through. We're not going to take anything that belongs to you. God forbid. We just want to pass through. And the minute the king of Amori, whose name was Sichon, hears this, he gathers his army. He goes to attack the Jews. And the Jews fight back and defeat the Amorites. So now Moab says, these Jews are very powerful. We need to destroy them. We need to annihilate them, weaken them. So he tries something different. Instead of fighting with conventional warfare, which is arms and power, he hires a Gentile prophet by the name of Bilam. And he says to Bilam, I want you to come curse the Jews. And it's a long story, which we'll get back into in a minute. I just want to give you the overview. Bilam ultimately goes to curse the Jews, but when he opens his mouth to curse, only blessings come out of his mouth. And some of the blessings that Bilam gave are the most beautiful blessings the Jewish people ever received. And ironically, they came from the mouth from a Gentile prophet. In other words, just like God grants prophets to the Jewish people, God also grants prophets to the nations of the world. And he was a Gentile prophet. And until this very day, the most famous verse we all know is Ma tovu halacha Yaakov. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. That was a blessing that was given by Bilam to the Jewish people when he intended to curse, but instead he gave a blessing. And every day in our daily prayers, we sing this song, or we say these words, how goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling place is Israel. And there are many other beautiful blessings. For example, he says, those mevarechecha baruch, those who bless you will be blessed. And those who curse you will be cursed. That's echoing the words that God told Abraham, that those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. But once again, this comes out of not Abraham, but it comes out of Bilam, a Gentile prophet. So that's the overall story. Now we're going to get into a lot of the details of the story and some of the fascinating ideas. And the first idea comes from the very name of the Gentile prophet. What is his name? Bilam. Now, we used to have a member in our synagogue of blessed memory. His name was Dr. Edward Steinberg, and he used to like to make puns with words. So he said, why did Balak send for Bilam to curse the Jews? And why did Bilam agree to go with Balak to curse the Jews? So if you read in the story, he sends him a message, I'll give you gold and silver and wealth. If you come, I'll reward you handsomely if you curse the Jews. So Dr. Steinberg used to use a pun. He said, because Bilam went with Balak because he wanted to bill him. He wanted to make some money, which gets to the heart of what I wanted to say. And that is that the word Bilam, if you divide it into two words, the name of this Gentile prophet, it could spell Beli Am, without a nation. What does that mean? He was a prophet without a nation, which means he was a prophet for hire. He was a Gentile prophet for hire, which basically means he had no loyalties, no allegiances, no integrity, no convictions. He was basically, whoever hired him, he was ready to work for that person. Whichever nation needed his services as a Gentile prophet, he was ready to be of service to them. What was he looking for? He was just looking for honor. He was looking for wealth. He was looking for financial reward. That represents a person who doesn't follow some internal morals, values, but just does whatever is most opportunistic, whatever is most gratifying, rewarding, satisfactory to that person, rather than have some kind of a moral compass and conviction of what they're standing up for. So if you contrast Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu, and Bilam, by the way, his story doesn't end well. He's a disgraced prophet at the end of his life. Not only that, he's killed in battle later. So his opportunistic form of prophecy led to his downfall, not just spiritually, but physically. Now we contrast that with Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest Jewish prophet. Moshe Rabbeinu was a person who was all about loyalty and faithfulness and conviction and integrity and honesty. Going all the way back to the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, he left his palace where he was being raised as a prince in Egypt to defend his brethren. He could have said, look, life is good in the palace. What do I have to stick my neck out and get in trouble and lose my royal status as a prince in Egypt? But Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't looking for his own self-interest. He was altruistic. He was doing it for what he believed in, what he stood for. And he was willing to stand up, even if it meant jeopardizing his position of power and luxury and comfort in the palace of Egypt. And then throughout his career, you find the same story again. When the Jews worship the golden calf, Moshe Rabbeinu pleads for forgiveness. And he actually says to God, if you don't find it in your heart to forgive the Jewish people, wipe me out of your Torah, which means I'm going to retract my name, my partnership in this whole Torah enterprise of giving the Jewish people a moral code. I don't want to have anything to do with it if you cannot forgive the Jewish people. He was willing to stand up and defend the Jewish people and do whatever it takes and sacrifice whatever it takes. And this is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu time and again, a selfless, devoted leader who believed in a cause. And these models of a Bilam prophet leader and a Moses prophet leader is so practical and relevant till our very own day. What we need is leaders like Moshe Rabbeinu, who believe in the cause, who believe in the goal, who believe in the people they are leading, and are willing to do what it takes, not to self-aggrandize and build up their own power and prestige and success, but do what it takes to be a true leader, which is to be loyal and faithful to the people you are leading. And today, unfortunately, there are different types of politicians. There are politicians who really believe in something and they stand for something and they're willing to sacrifice whatever it takes. If it means losing votes or losing power or losing whatever it is, they will stand for their beliefs and their morals and their ethics and their convictions. And then there are leaders that are just opportunists. They're just looking out for themselves and they're willing to sacrifice others for their own self-interest. That is what Bilam is all about. And that's why the very name Bilam means Bili Am. He had no nation. He had no, whatever you needed him to do, he was ready to do if you were willing to pay the price. He didn't have a set of values that he had to conform with. He just did whatever was needed. He was for hire. He was for sale. His services and his values and his morality was always available for sale. And that's what we find in this story. So now let's tune back into the story. Because in the beginning of the story, we find something very interesting. And here rabbis learn a very important lesson, and we could all apply this second lesson as well. And just going back to the idea of leadership, leaders doesn't mean you have to be a prophet or you have to be a leader of a nation. Again, I always remind everyone that we're all leaders. In whatever circle you have influence, you are a leader, whether it's in your home, whether it's in your work, whether it's in amongst your friends, and always be the type of leader who stands for something. They say if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for everything. Have something, convictions that you believe in and that you're willing, whether it's being Jewish. And, if there's anti-Semitism and you hear someone do something or say something that's derogatory, you're willing to stand up, even if it means jeopardizing or putting at risk your own benefits, your own status, like Moshe Rabbeinu was willing to do throughout his career. That's what made him Moshe Rabbeinu, as opposed to Bilam, who had a terrible downfall. So now going back to the story. There are three scenes in this story. Scene number one opens up with the king of Balak sending a delegation to the Bilam, the Gentile prophet, and he says, listen, I need your help. This nation that left Egypt, they're prosperous, they're growing, they're conquering nations. I need you to come curse this nation because they're too powerful. So they arrive in the home of Bilam, and it says they came with charms in their hands, which means they brought gifts. They showed him how wealthy they are, how much they could offer him. And they convey the words of Balak. And what does Bilam? He's a prophet after all, right? So a prophet has to listen to God. He can't just do what he wants. He has to see what God says. So he says to his guests, stay the night. I'll tell you in the morning after God speaks to me and tells me if I should accept this mission, this job. And so the princes of Moab spend the night with Bilam. God comes to Bilam in the night, in the dream, and he says, who are these people with you? Now, of course, God knows who these people are, but God, so to speak, leaves room for man to err. And God says, who are these people with you? As though I don't know. So if you think you want to fool me, you could convince yourself perhaps that you could fool me. So he says they came to me and they want me to curse the Jewish people. So what does God say? I'm going to read the words in verse 12 of chapter 22. Vayomer Elokim el Bilam. God says to Bilam, Lo telech imahem. Do not go with them. Lo ta'ar ta'am. Do not curse the nation. Ki baruchu, because they are a blessed nation. So God says, don't go. So what does Bilam do? He wakes up in the morning. He tells the emissaries of Balak, the officers of Balak, I'm sorry, go home because God doesn't grant me permission to go with you, and therefore I can't help you. So they go back to Balak, the king of Moab, and they say, Bilam rejected your offer. He can't come. So what does he do, Balak? He doesn't like taking no for an answer. So he sends a higher ranking delegation than the first one, more prominent officials. And they come back to Bilam and they say, Balak says, please do not turn me down because I will honor you greatly. Anything you ask me to do, I will do for you. Please just come and curse this nation for me. And what does Bilam say to the servants of Balak? I'm sorry, but if Balak, your king, offers me an entire house filled with gold and silver, I cannot violate the word of God. If God doesn't tell me I can go, there's nothing I can do about that. I cannot deviate from Hashem's instructions, whether small or big. So he says, stay a second night. I'll discuss it with God again. Let's see what God tells me. And this time God comes to him in scene number 2, the second dream. And he says, listen, if these people are calling you to come, go with them. But whatever I tell you to say, you will say. Whatever I tell you to do, you will have to do. So he wakes up in the morning and he says, okay, let's go. We're off and running. I got permission to go. So before we even get to the third scene in this episode, and there are many scenes actually, but the first 3 scenes that lead up to the curses, which are transformed into blessings, we have a very obvious question that all the rabbis ask. The first time the delegation came, Bilam says, I got to talk to God. I got to hear what God has to say. God tells him, do not go with them. Do not curse the nation. Second time, he sends a second delegation, a more prestigious delegation. This time, what happens? He says, stay the night. And God comes to him and says, okay, if they called upon you, you can go. But whatever I tell you to speak, that's what you will speak. That's what you will do. So what happened? Did God change his mind? Why did God tell him no the first time and then granted him permission the second time? And here rabbis give us a very powerful principle in life. And the principle is, B'derech she'adam rotzeh leilech molichin oso, which means on whatever path a person wants to go, God leads that person, which means God wants us to determine the direction. Once we choose our direction, at that point, God says, you have free choice. If that's the direction you want to go in, I'll let you go in that direction. So the first time Bilam asks God in a dream and God appears to him, God says very clearly, don't go with them. Do not curse the nation. Don't want you to go. Don't want you to attempt to curse the Jewish people. Now, when the second delegation, so he sends them home. He says, I can't help you. God said no. No is no. But then Balak sends a second delegation to Bilam. And instead of Bilam saying, I already told you no, sorry, get lost, he says, you know what? Stay the night. Let me see. Maybe God will allow me to go. In other words, he showed that he really wants to go. He wants to get the honor. He wants to get the monetary rewards of gold and silver and wealth. So God sees that he doesn't want to take no for an answer. He's looking for a yes. So God says, okay, I'll let you go. But remember, I'm in control. You're a prophet. You're going to speak what I tell you to say. And we see he gets up early in the morning and he saddles his own donkey. He's enthusiastic to go on this mission. The Rabbi say, you see, if you show God that you want to go in a certain direction, even if it's not the direction God wants you to go, but God will not take away your free will. And since Bilam really wanted to go on this mission, God allowed him to go. So just because you're successful in something doesn't mean that's what God wants you to do. He's letting you go down the path you have chosen for yourself. So what we come to is a very fundamental lesson once again. The fundamental lesson is that the idea of a prophet is that he listens, or she listens, a prophetess. And it's interesting that the word silent is the same 6 letters as the word listen, because you have to be silent in order to listen. So we all could hear God's voice speaking within us if we only are silent for a moment and meditate and think, what does God want? But once we hear God's word, we have to be willing to accept it. Sometimes we don't want to accept no for an answer. Someone who was once running a drug rehab center said that the people who come here for rehab was for young teens who got involved in drugs. He said, we're the first, so for some of these teens, we're the first ones that ever loved them enough to say no to them. In life, if your parents love you, they'll say no to you because it's more difficult to say no than to say yes. So true love is not saying yes all the time, but it's actually knowing how to say no out of love. And sometimes God tells us no. And that's what God told Bilam. No, you can't go with them. But if we persist in our desire, God says, look, you have free will. I'll let you go if you want to go on that path. So the second time around, God does allow Bilam to go with the servants, the officers, the delegation that Balak sent to go curse the Jews, with one caveat that whatever I tell you to say, you will have to say. And now we come to scene number 3, which is the most remarkable scene in the whole Torah portion, or maybe one of the most remarkable scenes in the whole Torah. And it's, again, in our Chumash, it's page 860. In any Chumash, it's chapter 22 of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And it's basically the prelude of the Shrek movie. For those who are familiar with the Shrek movie of a speaking donkey, well, the real first speaking donkey is in this week's Torah portion. And I know it sounds a little outrageous, but we're going to analyze it. But basically the story is, as he's going on the path, this is now Bilam traveling to Moab, to the Moabite land to curse the Jews, where the Jews are camping. An angel comes and stands on the road to impede the journey of Bilam. And Bilam is traveling on his donkey with 2 of his young servants. The donkey, the verse says, sees the angel of God on the road, and the angel is holding a sword drawn in his hand. So what does the donkey do? It veers off to the side into a field because it sees the angel in its path. So what happens then? Bilam strikes the donkey to get it to go back to the proper path. So now the angel stands in the vineyards where there's two fences from one side and the other. Once again, the donkey sees the angel of God, so it presses against the wall to get around the donkey, so to get around the angel. And it presses the leg of Bilam into the wall. So what does Bilam do? He gets angrier and he hits his donkey again. And then the third time, the angel of God goes and stands in a very narrow path that there's no way to go right or left. Now the donkey can't go anymore. So the donkey sees the angel of God and it crouches down underneath Bilam. And now Bilam gets very angry and he hits the donkey a third time. And here's the most fascinating verse, 28 of 22, chapter 22. Vayiftach Hashem et piason. God opens the mouth of the donkey and it says to Bilam, what have you done to me that you struck me 3 times? And Bilam says to the donkey, because you made a mockery of me, you made a fool out of me. Had I had a sword in my hand, I wouldn't just hit you, I would kill you. And the donkey says to Bilam, am I not your loyal, faithful donkey that you've ridden on your whole life? And yet, am I accustomed to doing such a thing to you? Obviously, there's something going on. Suddenly, God opens the eyes of Bilam and he sees the angel of God standing on the road with a sword. And he bows to the angel of God and he says to him, I am an angel of God. Why did you hit your donkey 3 times? It was all because of me that the donkey did not want to continue on the path and went off the path and went into the wall and pressed your foot and so on and so forth. And that's the 3 times the donkey veered away. And Bilam says to the angel of God, I know I have sinned. I did the wrong thing. And if you're not happy that I'm going on this journey to go curse the Jews, tell me and I'll go back. And the angel says to him, continue to go with the people, but remember, only what God allows you to say will you say. And so now Bilam continues on his journey with the officers of Balak. So these are the 3 scenes up until Bilam arriving, being greeted by the king of Moab and his attempts to curse the Jewish people, which is the next section of the story, and then the ultimate blessings, and then the end of the Torah portion, which we'll hopefully get to as well, the aftermath of this story. But looking at this donkey story, that's why I said it's the prelude to Shrek, a speaking donkey. Now, you may be wondering, how do animals speak in the Torah? Well, all you have to do is go back to the Garden of Eden, and the snake, the serpent, spoke to Eve and convinced her to eat from the tree and so on and so forth. So the Torah has stories of speaking creatures, and obviously God can make a miracle, and even an animal can speak if God wills it to speak. So that's not a big surprise. But what's the meaning behind this story? Like, why would God send this angel and the donkey has to veer off the path and brush his foot up against the wall, and what's happening here? And perhaps this is a continuation of the story. It's obviously a continuation of the story, but it's a continuation of God's rebuke of Bilam. You see, Bilam was a prophet of God. But what God was showing Bilam was that you could lose all of your prophecy, to the point that the donkey saw what even Bilam couldn't saw. The donkey saw the angel on the road. Bilam couldn't see it until God opened his eyes and he saw the angel, and then he started communicating with the angel. And what God was showing him is that just because you're a prophet, it doesn't entitle you automatically to the ability to be divine and to be able to connect with God. If God so wills it, you could lose your ability to be a prophet, and a donkey, an animal, could achieve a higher level of vision, of understanding, of communication with God than even you, a Gentile prophet. And if you look at the very words that Bilam says, he says, you have made a mockery of me. Why? Because here I am, I'm going with the officers of king of Moab, Balak. I'm a very respected, honored, prestigious, renowned Gentile prophet. And now I'm a laughing stock. People look at me and they see my donkey is making a fool out of me. I can't control my own donkey. And what was doing was humbling Bilam to recognize that all of his power only comes from God. And therefore, he should not be arrogant or prideful and think that he has the ability to misuse his powers for negative goals. But he should realize he's no more than a tool in the hands of God. And only with that humility can he properly use his power. Because God, if he chooses, could substitute him for a donkey. And a donkey could become the instrument and the tool of God even quicker than a human being if God so chooses. And therefore, do not become arrogant, because the downfall of man, of course, is when they take themselves too seriously. As someone said, take God so seriously that you won't take yourself seriously. A true prophet is humble, like Moses was the humblest prophet, the humblest human being. He takes God seriously, not himself. Gentile prophet Bilam was someone who took himself too seriously. And so sometimes you have to know how to laugh at yourself. And sometimes God laughs at you. As in this case with Bilam, God made a mockery of Bilam to humble himself and make him realize that it, and especially in the eyes of the officers of Balak who came to receive him, that remember the source of your strength and your power. Don't abuse it or misuse it, and realize without that strength, without that power, you can just act like a fool and be more blind-sighted than an actual donkey can. And using a donkey to be the one to communicate this message was a very stark way of getting the message across to Bilam that he's no more than an instrument, no more than a mouthpiece for God's words, and whatever God will put into his mouth will be what he will be able to speak. So now we come to chapter 23, where now Bilam and Balak meet up. And Bilam says, okay, if I'm going to curse the Jews, you have to build a certain amount of altars, 7 altars, and bring various sacrifices. I have to try to appease God in order to be able to curse the Jewish people. And he begins to open his mouth to curse the Jewish people. And one of the first things he says is, he tells Balak, listen, I can't curse those that God does not want to curse, and I can't create anger against those that God is not angry with. And then he says the opening verse, Ki meirosh tsurim erenu, for from its Ki meirosh tsurim erenu, from its origins, I see it rock-like. Now, what does it mean from its origins? Its origins are its patriarchs and its matriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And then he goes on to say, meaning I see them from their origins. This is a nation that has great origins, that has great ancestry, great patriarchs and matriarchs who are very loyal and devoted to God. And then he says the following words. And these are very important words. And again, if you want to see the prophecy of the Torah, even as it comes through the mouth of a man by the name of Bilam, who's attempting to curse the Jews, but he utters truths ultimately, and even blessings. He says the following words, and these words are very famous. Hein am levadad yishkon. Behold, it is a nation that will dwell in solitude, ubagayim lo yitchashav, and not be reckoned amongst the nations. Now think about the power of these words and the meaning of these words. What was Bilam saying about the Jewish people? What did he mean? And obviously there's many layers of interpretation, but just taking it on the simple meaning. He says they come from the greats, from giants, from the rocks. I see them, rock-like, meaning their origins are very high and great Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. But then he says, behold, it is a nation that will dwell in solitude. Wow. 3,300 years ago. Bilam says, this is a nation that will always dwell in solitude. They will always be alone. Ubagayim lo yitchashav, and not be reckoned amongst the nations. They will never be embraced, accepted amongst the other nations. They will always be a nation dwelling alone, apart. Now, just on the sheer prophecy and truth of this, we know that to be the case. I mean, finally, Israel is reestablished in 1948, and we finally feel, okay, we have a nation like any other nation. And yet, what's the one nation that's always isolated, that's always marginalized, that's always treated differently than any other nation? Israel. Israel's always criticized, singled out, double standard, always blaming Israel. And there are many countries that have land disputes. Israel's not the only one, but the only nation that the world calls for apartheid and for BDS is Israel. Why? We're always a nation that dwells apart. Now, how is this a blessing? These are supposed to be words of blessing. And there's many ways it can be viewed as a blessing. One is that the nations don't allow us to assimilate. Anti-Semitism reminds us constantly that we're Jews. And therefore, even if a Jew attempts to assimilate, the Gentile reminds him, no, you're not one of us. In Germany, Jews were so assimilated, integrated, they were more German than the Germans. And then when Hitler came along, he said, no, you're not one of us. You're a Jew. You're different. So as much as a Jew wants to lose his identity, the Gentile doesn't allow them to become a part of them. Always reminds them, you're apart, you're separate, you're a nation that dwells alone. And so therefore the Jewish people have always dwelled alone, but that's the way we've been able to maintain our identity. I mean, there's no other logical way to understand this, because the Jewish people are 0.2% of the world's population. We're less than 1/4% of the world's population. How can something that is less than 1/4% not become swallowed up in the 99.75% or 0.8% of the majority? How is it that for over 3,000 years we still remain a distinct Jewish people? We're still around. Why did we never lose our uniqueness, our Jewish identity? It goes back to these words. You are a nation that dwells alone and will never be reckoned amongst the nations. The nations will never accept you. You will always remain a separate people. And while this may be a curse in a sense, because we're always singled out for mistreatment, on the other hand, that has been our blessing, that we've preserved our Jewish identity and not been reckoned, meaning assimilated amongst the nations, because we've always been kept apart from all the other nations. But to take this blessing one step further, it's not only something that is thrust upon us, but it's something that we actually choose. And how do we maintain our uniqueness, our distinctness? How do we preserve our identity, our heritage, and transmit our values and our teachings and our laws and our gifts from generation to generation? So here's the thing. The Torah says they are a nation. This is the words of Bilam. It's all coming from this Gentile prophet. And by the way, there's a verse in Proverbs that says, Yahalalucha zar velo picha. Let the mouth of a stranger praise you, not your own. You should never sing your own praises. Others should praise you. If a Jew says something about the Jewish people, it's not as powerful as a Gentile saying it, as we all know. So here you have a Gentile prophet who does not have good intentions, but he says, this is what I see about these people. They're unique. They're a nation that dwells alone and does not reckon amongst the nations. How is that done? So it's been pointed out that the Jewish people are different than any other generation, any other nation. How are they different than any other nation? Because what makes a nation a nation? Any nation in the world, what makes them a nation? What makes them a nation is that there's a group of people who live on a piece of land. They have a territory. They have a geographical location. They share a common land. And because they live on a common land, they create a society, they create a country, and they create laws that govern them. And they create a bond, right? We're Americans, we're Europeans, we're, whatever, Australians, because we all live together in this country. That's what's unique about a nation. The Jewish nation is not like any other nation. Why? Because, as we know, Jews live all over the world. There are Jews in every far-flung corner of the earth. So if we don't have, we have a homeland, we have the land of Israel, but yes, in our generation, we came back to Israel in 1948. But even today, only half of the Jewish people live in Israel. The other half live around the world. So what makes us a nation? And what about the 1900 years from the destruction of the temple in the year 70 till 1948, where we had no land? We were scattered all over the earth. We had no country of our own. We didn't have authority or governance in any land. What kept us as a nation for close to 2,000 years? So here we're like no other nation. Every other nation lives together on a geographical place. But the Jewish people are not a nation because of land. Let's go back. When did we become a nation? We became a nation when we left Egypt, when we entered into the desert, and God gave us the Torah. The desert is a no man's land. So what bound us together as a nation? What made us a nation was the Torah, the divine constitution of the laws of the Torah that God gave us. And what's fascinating is that we are called the nation of the book, Am HaSefer. Why? Because it's not just saying you're the nation of the book, the people of the book, because we have a book called the Torah. Every nation has a book. Every nation has many books, constitutions and other books, their stories, their history. The people of the book means that there's no other people that were created through a book. Usually you have a people and then they write books. We had a book that made us into a people. Our book is our nation. And that's why no nation could destroy us, because even if we're exiled out of our land, we don't lose our nationality, because our nationality was never predicated on a piece of property, a piece of land, a piece of territory or real estate or geography. It was predicated on the book. And as long as we have the book, even if our enemies burnt our books, like they did many times, they burnt our Torah scrolls, they burnt our Talmud. As long as we know the words of the Torah, we have that covenant with God. We're a nation and we are connected to each other. And that's why Jews, no matter where they were in the world, always knew they were one people. Today, if you go and meet a Jew anywhere in the world, you immediately feel a kinship. You feel a connection. My fellow Jew, you never met this person. He doesn't even speak your language, maybe. But you're still one people. Why? Because wherever that Jew lives, they have the same Torah. They have the same laws, the same commandments, the same holidays, the same rituals, the same observances. And you're one through the power of the book. And that's what the prophet Bilam was saying, is they are a nation that lives alone. There's no other nation like them in their category. And they are never reckoned amongst the nations. That even if there's just a few Jews living in a far-flung place, they don't become assimilated amongst the nations because they have the Torah, which makes them into a nation and preserves their identity and their nationality. And that's the opening words of Bilam, which serve as a blessing, actually, until this very day. There are many, many other blessings that we can move on to. The most famous one is, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. And this one became a daily prayer that we recite every morning. And even though it was said by Bilam, because it was words of truth, they became incorporated in our daily prayers. And again, there's many, many layers of meaning to these words and the blessing. But the blessing is, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. So the first thing the verse is telling us is that we dwell peacefully, harmoniously. And Rashi says that Bilam saw that the tents of the Jewish people was structured in a way that no two doors faced each other, which means that there was modesty, there was privacy. And why is that so goodly and so wonderful? Because a lot of unhappiness in life comes from people looking into the tent of other people. Rather than looking in your own tent and appreciating what you have, you're busy looking in someone else's tent. And today with social media, that's taken to a whole new level, because I could sit in my house and look in people's homes around the world because I'm looking on social media what their life looks like, their family, their marriages, their children, the beauty of their homes, right? We're on Zoom now. I could see everyone's home. I could see what your home looks like, right? But the point is, don't have your door facing the door of someone else. Don't look into someone else's tent. Because if you're looking into other people's tent, you'll be focused on what they have and not appreciating what you have. And therefore, the blessing of how goodly are the tents of Jacob is that the doors were not facing one another, but people were rather looking within themselves. Everyone has their blessings in life, and no one really knows what's going on in someone else's tent anyways. So therefore, focus inwards on what you have rather than looking into the tent of others. So that's one meaning of this verse. Another reason why we perhaps say it every day is because Bilam was attempting to curse the Jews, but he was forced to sing the praises of the Jews. And that's a daily reminder that as Jews, as we go out into the world, there are always those who are seeking to find fault in Jews and to curse us. But we have to make sure that, like the Jewish people, we not only don't give our enemies an opportunity to find fault and curse us, but on the contrary, we elicit words of praise and blessings from their mouth, because when they look at the Jew, they see such noble behavior and character that they're inclined to bless rather than to curse. But there's another spiritual meaning to this verse. The verse says, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. Now, Jacob and Israel is the same person. Jacob got the name Israel when he wrestled with the angel. But what is the idea of a tent versus a dwelling place? The obvious answer is that a tent is temporary. You put it up, you take it down. A dwelling place is permanent. And what the verse is saying is that there's two ways that we serve God. There are some things we do on a permanent, ongoing basis that are continuous throughout our lives. But then there are certain things that we only do temporarily. So, for example, prayer. We can't pray 24/7. We can't learn Torah 24/7. But let's say right now, we say, okay, from 12 to 1, we're going to learn Torah. And 1 o'clock, we're going to close the Chumash and go do other things. So we built a tent. We built a temporary dwelling for God. We brought God into our lives by learning his Torah for an hour. So it may only be a tent, but God says how good that is, because right now you built a tent, and then maybe in the afternoon you'll study a little bit more, or you'll do some other good deeds, some mitzvah, you'll help a fellow person, or you'll go say some prayers. But the point is, it's not just the permanent structures, the things that are ongoing on a continuous basis, but the little things we do along the way. Those tents are very precious. And not only are they precious, but they come before the dwelling places in a sense, because it's the fact that we take time out of our schedule to do these mitzvot, these righteous deeds that connect us with God and our fellow man. These are the tents that are so goodly and so praiseworthy that Bilam praises the Jews for this righteousness. Now, there's another general question about this story before we get to the punchline, which is like the ending of the story. What happens after he blesses the Jewish people? And by the way, another blessing he says is, I mean, there's so many blessings, but one blessing, as he says, is that the Jewish people, and this is very interesting, what is the symbol of the modern state of Israel? It's either the menorah or the lion. Why a lion? Many times in a synagogue, you'll see lions on the ark or different places. What's the symbolism of a lion? A lion is obviously a powerful animal. But one of the things Bilam says is, Hein am kalavi Heim am kalavi akum ukari yisnasa. What does that mean? Behold, the people will arise like a lion cub and raise itself like a lion. What exactly is Bilam saying? That they will arise like a lion cub and raise itself like a lion. And here again, the beautiful blessing, and that's why the state of Israel's symbol is the lion. if you go to a safari or a zoo and you see a lion and the lion is crouching, you may think, oh, he's sitting down, he's crouching, right? But even when he's crouching down, you know he's a very powerful beast. And in an instant, he could rise up and have all of his power. Same thing with the Jewish people. Sometimes the nations of the world cause the Jewish people to crouch down like a lion cub, crouching down. And others can look at us and say, oh, they're just crouching. They're low, they're down. But in an instant, we rise back up like that ferocious lion with all of our strength and all of our power. And the most stark example, of course, is after the Holocaust. During the Holocaust, we were at our lowest point. 6 million of our brethren were murdered. We were skeletons. We were in the concentration camps. But we were liberated with God's help. And we rose up like a mighty lion, came back to Israel, reclaimed our ancestral land after 1900 years, reestablished our presence in Israel and Yerushalayim. That's the metaphor that Bilam was saying, is don't think they're just like a crouching low lion. A Jew may temporarily be in a state of crouching, but he's still a lion inside of him. He has that lion heart and that faith and that soul, and he will rise back up again. And that's what has happened time again in Jewish history. But here's an overall question before we get to the end of the Torah portion. You know, one of the things about Bilam was that, and actually, you know what? We have to go to the end of the story first. What's the end of the Torah portion? Balak is very disappointed in Bilam. He says, I hired you to curse the Jews. And not only didn't you curse the Jews, you blessed them. What have you done? So Bilam says, listen, I told you from day one, I can't say anything God doesn't allow me to say. So don't be angry at me. That was the condition up front. But then he says, I'll tell you what you can do. He says, I can't curse the Jews. God loves them. He doesn't allow me to curse them. However, what you can do is get them to sin. And if you get them to betray God and sin, then God will be angry at them and they will lose their special status of God's love, and then they will have their own downfall. And that's what Balak does. What does he do? Bilam says, tell the Midianite women, Moab and Midian were two nations that work together. He says, tell the girls to go out and seduce the Jewish men and engage with them physically. And not only engage with them physically, but lure them towards their idolatrous practices. And once God sees that the Jewish men are following the Midianite women physically and spiritually, engaging in their idolatrous practices, as well as sexually engaging with them, God will become angry at them. And that's the way the Torah portion really ends. It ends with the story of the Jewish people living in a place called Shittim and committing harlotry with the daughters of Moab. And then the daughters of Moab leading them to their feasts of their gods. And the Jews are eating and drinking and prostrate themselves to the Moabite, Midianite gods. And Jews became attached to a certain god called Baal Peor, and now God becomes upset with the Jews, and as a result of that, there's a plague, and as a result of that, many Jews die. And we'll get to next week's Torah portion and what happens after that. But the point of the story is that Bilam basically says to Balak, I can't destroy them. They could only destroy themselves. And the way they could do that is by deviating from God's plan, send out the Midianite women to seduce them, and then they will go astray after these other gods. Now, that in itself was a very, again, the beauty of the Torah is that it's a eternal book, and it remains true today as it was then. Nation after nation tried to annihilate the Jewish people, just like Moab tries to destroy the Jews. And time and again, they failed miraculously. We were this tiny nation without any power, without any armies, and all these mighty nations tried to destroy us, and nobody could, even though we're just less than 1/4 of 1% of the world. But sadly, what has worked against the Jewish people is when we assimilated on our own. Like the story of Bilam, get them to sin, get them to go astray, let them abandon God, and then they will self-destruct. And it's been pointed out that in the 76 years since the Holocaust, we lost 6 million of our brothers and sisters who were murdered by the Nazis and Hitler, cursed be his name. But believe it or not, we've lost more than 6 million Jews to assimilation since the end of the Holocaust. In other words, Jews are willfully abandoning their Jewish roots and intermarrying and assimilating. And that's what Bilam really said to Balak. I can't destroy them from without, but they could destroy themselves from within. But here's another very powerful lesson to be taken away from this story. Bilam, you would think, after everything he witnessed, right? First, God told him not to go. Then he insisted he wants to go. God allows him to go, but says, you have to say what I tell you to say. Then he meets a donkey along the way. That donkey sees the angel. He can't see the angel. The donkey talks to him, a speaking donkey, and says, why did you hit me? There's an angel on the road. And he sees the angel. He witnesses all these miracles, right? And God says, you can only do what I tell you to do. And then he opens his mouth to curse, and blessing after blessing after blessing comes out. You would think he would be a transformed man. But what do we find at the end of the story? He still says to Balak, okay, if you want to destroy the Jews, here's what I recommend you do. Send out the Midianite women to seduce the Jewish men. And you say, how could a man, after everything he experienced, after everything he witnessed, he saw the divine, he was a prophet to begin with. He communicated with God. And then he saw that God loves the Jewish people and protects them. You would think he would be transformed by this experience and he would somehow learn his lesson and not proceed in his desire to cause the Jewish people to self-destruct and not advise Balak how to engage the Jewish men in immorality and idolatry. But yet he's not a changed man. He continues on his path. He is after the fame and the fortune and the wealth that Balak could provide him. And that's why ultimately that's his downfall. Ultimately, he is killed in battle. He does not survive. And his prophecy that was granted to him as a gift that could have been used for good, to be a source of inspiration, of more righteousness, of morality, to teach, to guide, to advise others, was used only for his own selfish interests and motives. And ultimately, that's what led to his downfall. And a person could be shown such clear signs and guidance from above, and yet be oblivious to it and continue in their strong-minded, singular goal of just achieving some personal advantage or gain or wealth or success, and tune out all the clear signs around him. And this Torah portion, of course, is here to tell us the story, but also to teach us lessons, because a little bit of this exists in every one of us. That sometimes we make a decision or we go down a path that we know is not the right path. And we even get very clear signs or signals or messages that we shouldn't be doing this. But instead of stopping and saying, wait, what's going on here? Clearly, God is sending me a message. I should not be doing this. I need to turn around. I need to correct the situation. We just were so focused on achieving whatever we desire that we sort of turn a blind eye to everything and just keep on going down that path that we've already been warned isn't a good path. And then ultimately, unfortunately, we face consequences, as Bilam did. So here's an amazing story, a story of a Gentile prophet, a speaking donkey, but yet incredible life lessons, and really talks to the eternity of the Jewish people. And Bilam is somebody we never forget, because every day when we come to our synagogues, we say those words that he said, how goodly are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling places, Israel. And we're reminded of all these timeless lessons that we need to remember about the nature and the character of the Jewish people, and how we will preserve God's love for us and God's protection for us, and never, God forbid, fall victim to our own undoing which can only come not through the powers from without that seek our destruction, because they will never succeed. They will always fail, because God will protect us, but only through our own undoing, unfortunately, that we could bring about our own downfall. But as long as we remain true to our morals, our values, our Torah, our heritage, our beliefs, then no power and no force in the world can curse us. On the contrary, God will transform all of the curses of our enemies, all of their attempts to harm us, into a source of blessing. So thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, we can take them in the last minute. If anyone has a question, I'll just go to the chat box. You're welcome, Bonnie. It's great to see you as always. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to post them, and just wish everyone a good day and a good week ahead. Tomorrow we have Wisdom on Worth at 12 o'clock, lunch and learn. Scott, if you want to fly in, you're welcome to join us. But looking forward to seeing everyone. Take good care and have a wonderful day. Shalom.